so on. We are live, and the Hangout is live once again. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Audible Live. That's right, the footballguys.com podcast. I'm your host, Cecil Lammy, of course, joined with my co-hosts with the mosts, -1. Usually it's +1 when you go out, but -1 tonight with Matt Waldman and the busy schedule in July, late June, taking a dash of time off. Matt will be back next week on the show, so a hat tip to the great Matt Waldman. But first up tonight, I've got to introduce him because he was first in the Hangout tonight. It is Dr. Gene Bramall. Dr. Gene, how does it feel to be the first one here tonight?
There's a first time for everything, so I'm excited. There was a little bit of a bobble anyway because I couldn't get my picture to come up. That may be a good thing after all, but yeah, it's great to be here first.
He was a talking helmet for a little while, ladies and gentlemen. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall. Check out his work at footballguys.com. Next up, Sigmund Bloom. You know him. You love him. At Sigmund Bloom on Twitter. Bloom, I have a parenting question for you tonight. Mm-hmm. As you were saying, your son Miles loves Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I get a lot of compliments about my 3 children from all of you and my friends, and I appreciate that from everybody because that's whatever we do in life, being known as a great father, as a great parent, that's what we can take the most pride in. That's what's most important. But I will say this. My daughter Katerina had a sleepover, a play date with one of her friends. They went to Film on the Rocks, which is at Red Rocks, Bloom. I don't know if you're familiar, but they play movies at Red Rocks, which is really flippin' cool. She went, I said, what movie did you see? And she goes, oh, it was Spine something. And I said, Spinal Tap? You saw Spinal Tap? And she's like, yeah, I didn't really get it.
Sure.
So I feel like I may have done something wrong in parenting, Bloom.
No, she's too young. Is she even 11 yet?
She's 11 now. Yeah.
Turn it up.
Just turned it up to 11. That's okay. I was staying up and watching R-rated movies when I was 5 or 6 years old that I could have not had any way of understanding. And I was staying up to watch Blues Brothers and Caddyshack. So I turned out okay. And the thing is, we all have had that experience of having something kind of wash over us, and then days, months, years later saying, she'll have that too. You know, like the part with the cucumber wrapped up in foil. Why was that man have a cucumber wrapped in foil in his pants, Dad?
These are some tough questions. Tough questions tonight coming in via Twitter. Again, we'll get to that a little bit later in the program. Before we jump into the show topics, and yeah, it's the slow time. Yes, majority of you out there enthralled with the World Cup, but guess what? There's still a ton of NFL stories and action to discuss and talk about, even though teams are on a little bit of a break here. And before we get into the news items of the day, I want to remind you about the Football Guys 2014 Players Championship. The FPC is awarding a record $2 million prize pool, making it the largest $350 entry event by a substantial margin. The 2014 FPC will offer our best ever grand prize of $300,000. Championship round prizes are expanded down to 650th place. League prizes are $2,000 with $1,500 for first place and $500 for second. Entries are capped at 7,500 teams, and all prizes are guaranteed. Listen, you're playing high-stakes fantasy football. This is the most important part of what I'm about to tell you. The entire prize pool is escrowed for the ultimate in prize protection. The 2014 Football Guys Players Championship drafts will begin on Saturday, July 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern and run all the way until Thursday, September 4th, right before opening kickoff. The entry fee remains the same at $350 per team and 3 teams for $1,000. The new software will automatically discount every third team by $50. Register to play right now. Go to footballguys.com and check out the Football Guys Players Championship, the ultimate in high-stakes fantasy football. All right, fellas, we've got some news items, and it just so happens that these news items revolve around some injuries, but injuries that open up opportunity. Again, nobody's rooting for anyone to get injured, but these injuries happen, or they're injuries that maybe kind of hung around from last year, and then it opens up opportunity for players on said team. So tonight we're going to start South Beach with the Miami Dolphins. I got some thoughts about the offense a little bit later after my discussion with Omar Kelly from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. We'll get to that when we get to buy or sell. But no Sean Moreno with the knee injury. Looks like it is surgery. Looks like it is going to put him on the shelf for some time. Dr. Gene Bramwell, give us the latest on this Moreno injury. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were saying, Moreno could be the starter. And now it looks like at the start of the season, well, he may be shelved.
You're really not sure exactly where things stand with Moreno at this point. It's a arthroscopic knee surgery. It was described as a clean out, as a relatively less invasive procedure. But the interesting thing about this is usually if they're just going in and clipping a piece of meniscus or pulling some loose bodies out, we tend to hear a 2 to 4 week time frame. With Moreno, we're here in 4 to 5 weeks. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's something more important than that. Most of the time when there's a meniscus repair or something more going on than a simple clean-out procedure, we're hearing something more along the lines of 2 to 3 months. 4 to 5 weeks puts him around the time of the beginning of training camp. I think the interesting thing with this is going to be, we knew he was not in very good shape coming in. It took a couple of weeks that he really wasn't himself. Maybe the knee injury was part of that, why he wasn't in condition. But rehabbing from this particular surgery isn't necessarily going to get him in any better condition. So he may be starting behind the 8 ball a little bit, so to speak, as training camp starts. If he's not able to get into consecutive practices by the time the first preseason game is around the corner, then I think we need to be concerned about him. Probably not too much to see here with a 4 to 5 week time frame, but I'd be a lot more reassured about his prospects for early training camp if we got the usual 2 to 4 for a minor arthroscopic procedure.
Gene, injury prone, label, your confidence level when Moreno's on the field that he'll actually be able to stay healthy? I mean, the Broncos rode him into the ground last year, basically.
Yeah, and this is 2 separate knee problems for him. He had the ACL a couple of years ago, and then he had a stem cell treatment with the other knee we're talking about here with a similar situation just at the end of the year a couple of years ago. I think the more concerning thing for me with Moreno is his level of conditioning and the fact that he was where he was before this surgery happened. Injury prone to me means nothing more than he had injuries in the past. In this particular situation, since he's had a couple of knee injuries and they have possibly led to a conditioning issue, he's at a higher risk. But I think the conditioning issue and the setup for a cascade or a reconditioning injury, some sort of compensatory thing when he does get back on the field early in training camp is the big concern here.
Gene, I want
to Go ahead, Gene. Go ahead, Gene. Go ahead, Bloom.
Bloom to Gene. Bloom with the assist. Now, I want to, while we're on this Torino topic, I'm mouthing off a lot about how Denver broke Moreno in that 37 carry game against New England. Am I actually accidentally onto something? Is that real? That teams, if a running back gets an inordinate number of carries in one game, it can set them back for a lengthy period?
It depends on what lengthy period means. I think it could certainly set him back if he's got some chronic knee issues, some cartilage loss, and all football players will, and that may be part of what was going on with this. There isn't anything about the 4 to 5 week time frame that makes me think that it was something, in addition to, maybe it does mean that he had a little bit of a stem cell injection there, some PRP or something like that, more than, and not microfracture or anything like that. But if you've got a cartilage condition there and you run him into the ground, maybe it lingers for a couple of weeks to a month. I think the amount of time, since we're talking 6-7 months at this point, I doubt that it lingered that far and affected his conditioning that much just from that one particular game. If it did, then you have to wonder, at what point, why are we letting this go until June and July before we finally have a surgical procedure for this? If it affected his conditioning that much, if that was the reason for it, that particular game and the sequelae from that, it'd be a concern. I don't know that I would say one particular game, one particular overuse situation is going to cost a player 6 months, a year, a career, but I definitely think it adds up over the 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 weeks after that particular time frame.
Well, Bloom, it does create opportunity for the players behind him, an opportunity in an offense, and I'm going to spoil something. I may spoil something else later in the program. iTunes is very good right now. Let me just say that. Opportunity in this offense. I had a chance to talk to Omar Kelly about the Moreno thing, but we got into this offense. It's the Chip Kelly system, essentially. This is going to be very good for whatever running back that could emerge from this. At the top, Lamar Miller. not that long ago when we were, potentially talking about Moreno being at the top. Daniel Thomas, there was some discussion about, well, maybe Daniel Thomas doesn't make the team. Now you look at him, okay, lock. Mike Gillislee, a Moreno-like player. Again, and what I'm going to spoil here is I'm writing an article for Football Guys. Is Ryan Tannehill this year's Nick Foles? And you look at what Foles did, and springing onto the scene, and all the touchdowns, no very low interception total, in a similar offense, a similar structure. Terrible offensive line, gets worse with the Mike Pouncey injury. But the point is this: could Tannehill be that next guy? Well, could Miller be that McCoy light type player? This Moreno injury creates opportunity. Bloom, who takes advantage of it, and how do fantasy owners navigate this?
Yeah, I think you buried the lead a little bit because the Pouncey injury is the biggest news here, not Moreno. They already were having 4 new starters on the offensive line. If Pouncey's not ready for opening day, that makes 5. And it's not trivial to compare Miami's offensive line, which we'll look. Matt Batanti does terrific work at Football Guys rating offensive lines. I would say it's fair if you rank them 32nd out of 32. I'm not sure where he ranked them, where Philadelphia might be number 1, and I think that's massive. So in a dynasty value going up opportunity kind of question, I think Lamar Miller becomes intriguing. However, in a redraft format where I get 1 shot in the 8th round, 1 shot in the 9th round, 1 shot in the 10th round, which is about where, if you want Miller, that's about where you're going to have to target him right now. He's moving up, maybe 12th, 13th round a few weeks ago. There's a lot of attractive picks in that 8th, 9th, 10th round range. And even some running backs. I mean, if a Frank Gore or a Steven Jackson slips through, would I feel better about Miller? I don't know, because I do think you're going to see Miami rotate running backs in regardless. I think it's hard to imagine them getting a running game established that strong. I just think that really, no matter how they rearrange their deck chairs, it's still the Titanic. And I don't know that I want to invest in the Miami running backs unless Miller somehow ends up at the deep discount he was at before. 8th round, 9th round, I can probably find better picks.
You don't want to be floating aimlessly at sea screaming, Jack! Jack! By the way, Bloom, I'm just going to ask you this. Around Lamar Miller,
yeah,
there are backs like Steven Jackson, which you mentioned.
Right.
Also, Fred Jackson, Darren McFadden. Would you put yourself and say, hey, I'd rather have Fred Jacks or Darren McFadden except for Miller, over Miller?
Not McFadden. I've actually been moving the Oakland backs as a whole down. Again, and as we're getting closer to the season, I start to find myself more persuaded by that idea of, and as I'm doing more drafts, I'm in the MFL 10 of death right now with a lot of illustrious people. And as you get into redraft, snake draft mode, or even auction mode, you start to think about, where do I want to invest? And you have limited resources. The Oakland backfield, again, seems like one where it's hard to feel like somebody has to have value. Not necessarily. I do think that other running backs in that range, in that Lamar Miller range, and I'm looking at the latest ADP right now, and Lamar Miller in some sources has actually moved ahead of Moreno now. Around that same time, Terrence West, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but he's certainly somebody that's have a similar opportunity to Miller with a better offensive line. Kyrie Robinson around later, Bernard Pierce, Kristen Michael. I would probably honestly like the wide receivers, and 8th, 9th round is also where I'm probably going quarterback. And then in a round or two, take at running back a Devontae Freeman, maybe a Carlos Hyde, upside rookie play Jeremy Hill, or even go a little bit later like a Jonathan Stewart, Lance Dunbar, who continues to build some buzz. I just think that the overall risk-reward of Lamar Miller, he's not going to get 20 or 25 carries a game. I don't see that happening. I still see no Sean Moreno or Daniel Thomas or Mike Gillislee cutting down on his week-to-week upside. So 8th round is about the point where I would get out, although I do think that what you're getting at here with the running backs in that range, I just actually did an article at Football Guys about this. I called it Sweet Spots and Dead Zones, and there is kind of a, the 7th, 8th round, I think that Lamar Miller is part of the end of a sweet spot. The end of a sweet spot where if you're taking in the 8th round, if I'm comparing Lamar Miller, so if we go up the board a little bit, and I'm weighing Lamar Miller against Savon Ridley, I'm going to take Ridley. I'm going to take Ridley in that offense and what he's done, even with the risk that goes there. Frank Gore, again, has been sliding down. So Pierre Thomas is another player that you may see around that range. I just think that Lamar Miller, he does offer some upside in the form of talent, but that Pouncey news really counterbalances the excitement that might have been generated by Moreno being damaged goods.
Yeah, and the Pouncey news, huge. Dr. Gene, do you have anything to say about Pouncey and the hip surgery?
No, it's something that could be a little bit more difficult for a larger guy to come back from, like Pouncey, somebody that really needs to set in his stance with that hip there. We saw with Percy Harvin that he came back a little bit sooner and then had some struggles after that first couple of weeks back. We're already hearing 3 to 4 months at least with Pouncey. It could definitely be a little bit longer than that. He's got a bit of a head start over what Harvin had. Harvin had his procedure done just at the beginning of training camp last year. Hopefully that means Pouncey can get back a little bit sooner. But it may be that he needs every bit of that. Maybe he's pushing closer to 16 weeks rather than 12 weeks, rather than the 8 to 10 that we saw Harvin get a chance to come back.
And see, so I'm going to just jump in on piggyback on what Gene's saying too. That remember, he's missing all of training camp in the preseason, and he is the pivot. I mean, he's the center, and it's a brand new offensive line with 4 new starters. I mean, he was going to be the continuity. He was going to be the stabilizing force. Now, and Gene, while we're drilling down on this topic, I mean, what are the chances that he's like? What do you think he will be playing at in his first game? Like 75%, 80%? Like, how effective will he be when he first comes back on the field?
Well, you would hope that he's close enough. I don't know that I'd want to put a percentage on it necessarily. It depends on when he comes back. If he pushes it and tries to come back as early as possible for any number of different reasons, as you said, him being, the vital part of that offensive line, or if the Dolphins get off to a good start and they want to keep that going and bring Pouncey back a little bit early, I think the earlier he comes back, the more likely it is we'll see him have some struggles in the early going with some swelling or pain, as Harvin did with a similar injury. If it stretches on into the 4 to 5 month range, as we've heard it could, then hopefully that means he comes back and he has time to get into a little bit better condition. If he starts on PUP and he doesn't come off PUP until week 8 or 9, or even a little bit later, then hopefully those last few weeks of recovery are conditioning and readying for full-time play.
Right. So either he's missing games early this season, or he's coming back not quite up to. Either way, my point is,
I think that's fair.
There's no way to put a good spin on it. There's no way to be like, oh, this isn't as bad as it's as bad as it sounds.
Right, and think about the movement on this offensive line. Again, even if the other 4 guys are A-okay, the center is that pivot. He's the key piece, an inside zone read, especially. An outside zone read as well, because you get that extra blocker play side just based off the quarterback fake and the design where the running back is set up before the snap. But that center is so critical to get to his man, usually at the second level. So, I mean, it throws the biggest kink that you possibly could have if your center isn't quite himself.
It's terrible news for the Dolphins. I mean, it kind of got glossed over this week, but it's really bad news.
Yeah. For a team that you're thinking, well, maybe it's no. It'll be a little rough. I'll tell you what else was terrible news. It's a segue, Bloom. Listen, I think all of us, including Matt in this, we had a great appreciation for Jonathan Franklin coming out of UCLA. Remember him at the Senior Bowl last year, efficient runner, capable of going in between the tackles, but wasn't his bread and butter, didn't take it to the corner store all the time. Good things to say about him. Came in, had a 100-yard game as a rookie last year, then had that neck injury and went ahead and retired. Dr. Gene, we see these players with these more major injuries, and neck, you never mess around with the neck. And several players that played longer, Sterling Sharp, Eric Dickerson, Al Wilson, etc. Several players that played longer, neck injury, done. Franklin, done after 1 year. Dr. Gene, is this something maybe with the caution on of the body and the severeness of concussions and everything like that we're seeing, that maybe we see a little bit more of? And it's an unfortunate injury, an unfortunate way to end his football career, even more so than let's say a Kenny Irons or whatever, because we never saw him. We barely saw Kujana Carter, years ago, talking about Cincy backs. But we saw Franklin. He was a 100-yard rusher. He was pretty good, and now he's retired, Gene.
Yeah, and we've seen some speculation about is there a cluster of these things happening. We've seen it with Finley, we've seen it with Wilson, we saw it with Ahmad Bradshaw. There's been another small handful of players over the past couple of years. I think it's probably more coincidence than anything else, but as you said, we're going to see some more care taken with multiple concussions, and this is a little bit different injury, but we're going to see people take care to not put a player with a neck injury at risk. And we don't know if this is another case of spinal stenosis or if there's something a little bit different going on with some stability in the neck itself or a combination of all those things. It's not been revealed. And I think this is clearly, at least to me, something more than just the conservative Green Bay medical staff being conservative. Franklin's agent said that they're going to take another look at a couple of other specialists just for Franklin's peace of mind, but it certainly seems like Franklin has already made the decision that he's done what he's heard from the Packers medical staff and the specialists he's already seen have been enough to make up his mind that it's just not safe for him to continue to play. So maybe there's a slim chance that he'll come back, but I think it's really, really slim. If you're in a dynasty league and you're kind of holding out hope that we might see something positive, or this is Green Bay's medical staff being ultra conservative and he might find a home with a different team, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's his career is over.
Injury creating opportunity, Bloom, and this is where guys like James Starks are a favorite of yours. DeJuan Harris
Sure.
could see a larger role. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing. And we already saw an item that Green Bay maybe wants to limit Eddie Lacy's workload a little bit. And of course, we can revisit at this time last year talking about how, well, Lacy fell to the late second because of long-term durability issues. We were a bit perplexed why Franklin fell to the late fourth, but Green Bay did trade up for him, which was very rare for Ted Thompson. And we thought, well, Franklin can get his foot in the door because of Lacy's potential durability questions, and now it's Franklin who's out of the league prematurely, and Lacy. But I think that could maybe, just a slight shockwave. Gene brought up that medical staff. I do think that you don't want to use Lacy up really early in his rookie contract, and they do have Starks, Starks very quietly was running as well as he has in his entire career last year. He wasn't in a showcase role because of Lacy, but he's not that much of a step down. I mean, obviously Lacy's a more talented back, but he's not that much of a step down. And then DeJuan Harris, as you said, and it's easy to forget that going back into last year, you can look at the comments when Harris went down before the season, and you can see in the comments that the Packers were planning on having a bit of a committee. I mean, Harris was not going to be a backup or a change of pace. He was going to be a core part of that backfield. He's back to 100%. So I do think you're going to see them use all three running backs. I still think Lacy is worth that late first, early second where he's going. But we just saw tonight on Twitter Calvin Watkins, our man Calvin, one of the original beat writers. I think he's like one of the first or second to be on. They asked about DeMarco Murray on third down. He said that's Lance Dunbar's role. Now he followed up and said Dunbar's small and has had knee issues, so the blocking could be an issue. But all of those running backs after the top four, there's some question about exactly how big their workload will be, so it kind of levels them all off. I do think that this creates a little more opportunity for Starks and Harris, but in reality, it could cause them to take their foot off the gas with Lacy a little bit, which would preserve him.
With that news item, Bloom, and I'll turn it into Broncos show, does this make you like Monte more than Eddie?
I mean, at this point, that's a good question to go back and look at, and I think that's the question you're asking yourself. Late first, early second. It's Lacy versus Ball versus Murray versus Bell, and I still have Murray at the top of that group because of Scott Linehan and the way he feeds the running backs with receptions. Because Murray was producing so well at the end of the year last year. Because I do think that Dallas is going to get some wild and woolly shootouts that are going to feed his numbers. But I think that that's your group you're looking at in that early. Second, late first round range. And I think that Ball continues to be, this is going to be one of those questions, Cease, where you really come down to situation versus talent. And while situation is great, when you're taking Ball in the late first, early second, it's really hard to see how he can outperform that draft position unless they ride him into the ground. But unlike Moreno, he's not at the end of a contract. He's not somebody they didn't have plans for anyway. So I would say at this point, I think that Ball in the first round is still getting a little ahead of ourselves.
I will say this, and this kind of leads into our first buy or sell. the way Monte Ball finished last year in the final 6 games, 6.5 yards per carry, only second to Jamal Charles at 6.6 yards per carry. Number one in the league in percentage of rushes that went for first downs, 40%. And then you talked about that role. Last year we had Ball cutting into Moreno's time. This year there won't be that much cutting into Ball's time. He's not going to catch 60 passes. So PPR league owners, listen up. He's not going to catch 60 passes. I've seen him drop too many passes in minicamp. I know Adam Gase has said, hey, we're really impressed. He's a better receiver than he was at Wisconsin. He still has issues with catching the ball cleanly. And one thing about Moreno, I didn't like him as a runner, but he was fantastic as a pass blocker and receiver out of the backfield. Monte Ball's not going to do that. He's going to catch 40, and you're hoping for 40. So 1,200 yards, but you look at the touchdowns. That's the difference of where Monte Ball could make up for the lack of receptions. So take off those 20 receptions, but add in 3 or 4 more rushing touchdowns, get him up to 13, 14 on the ground, maybe 1 or 2 as a receiver. That's where more fantasy value comes in.
Chase, I gotta ask you a question now. I'm just stepping on everybody today because you brought it up. All right.
Okay.
Look, Matt's not here, so I feel like I can just stretch out a little bit. See, I've got that wide. I don't know why I'm in the wide screen on the bottom too.
It's because Matt's not here.
Yeah. So
there's room for one of us to be wide.
You brought it up, Cease. Moreno was really effective in the screen game last year. It was one of the best things. Who gets those targets this year?
Well, this ties into Decker as well. Remember, they're making up for the loss of Decker. And for those people that are like, oh, well, Latimer's going to cut into Sanders' time. No, he's not. Latimer will cut into Welker's time. Who gets those screen passes is Emmanuel Sanders. That's who gets those. Now, does he take up everything from Decker? I mean, does he get 90 catches this year and, go into the 90-catch club with Demaryius Thomas? It's possible. I would project more about 80. I think 75 to 80 is really safe to project for Emmanuel Sanders. But there's people that don't even think he'll do that. If you look at that screen game, obviously you're going to throw into Julius Thomas, but it's Emmanuel Sanders and the way that they can use him in multiple different ways. He's not just a deep threat. He's not just a guy you run a drag route with. And we can't talk specifics, but just know that Gase is being very creative. Gase has a brand new shiny toy. So who makes up for Moreno not being there in the screen game? That's Sanders. Welker's still going to do his thing, still going to run jerk routes, still going to have a certain amount of value. But if you look at average draft position right now, it's Welker far above Sanders. And Sanders, I think he fell to 27. Sanders could finish in the top 15, along with Demaryius, who will be, number 2, number 3, what have you. So don't sleep on Emmanuel, and it'll be interesting to see what the glimpses that we get in training camp and in the preseason specifically there as well. Now it's time for buy or sell. We're going to go over some more news items. Going to hand it out to the fellas and say, do you buy it or sell it? Bloom, I should set this one up, though. In fact, I should just give this to you to set up because the concerns about Le'Veon Bell's yards per carry as a rookie. I just brought up numbers, talking about Monte Ball at 6.5 yards per carry the final 6 games. And, numbers tell a part of the story, and there is a section, and I don't know if I'm going to get off my lawn in this segment or not, but there's a section of fantasy owners who just love to look at the numbers and love to project, and that's all they said, and they never watch. Why would you watch the film? And for me, it's the film that tells you everything. The numbers will tell parts of the stories, but they can be very deceptive, and there's something that you can't take as gospel. You and I discussed this, and this is why you should set it up for all of us here in buy or sell, but there's a concern, Bloom, by some out there about the 3.5 yards per carry from Le'Veon Bell, and that being some sort of tell about what his future production will be. Take it away.
Yeah, and we continue to see. I do see some narrative out there about LeGarrette Blount, and LeGarrette Blount's going to take away a lot of touches and things like that. And I actually think it's more like the Lacey, Starks, and Harris, where really you want some breaks for this guy because otherwise he's going to be running to the ground. If you go back to what Bell did at Michigan State, who's notorious for using up the running backs there, and then last year he only played 12 games and still had a large amount of touches. You don't want him with 400 touches this year. And then you get to the yards per carry, and I think it's Trent Richardson. I think Trent Richardson has everyone spooked, and I do think that there's similarities in that Richardson and Bell are both big backs who are a little dainty. You know, they prefer to use their footwork, their agility, athleticism, than just bowl people over. They're not like Alfred Morris, who almost looks like he's trying to run through enemy lines or something whenever he gets the ball in his hands. But if you watch the Steelers last year, the Steelers' offensive line was terrible. And Bell and his hesitation in the backfield and his ability to use his agility to go somewhere where the hole is opening, or maybe, not so much the hole is opening, but the one place there isn't penetration, he could find it. And there were a lot of carries that any back, especially LeGarrette Blount, who takes about 4 steps to get up to speed, any back is going to be tackled in the backfield where Bell is getting 1, 2, 3 yards out of some of these touches. So there's just, if you're citing Bell's yards per carry as a reason to avoid him this year, if you thought the Steelers' offensive line was going to be as bad, which is hard for me to swallow because of Mike Munchak, then maybe you would think of it as a reason to stay away from him. But I think it's a red herring to point to that. Plus, he still had great production because of the red zone, because of his ability to be a receiver out of the backfield. So everything is on schedule for Bell to be worth what he was last year.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to sell this as well, not just because I'm not anti-numbers. Again, numbers are interesting. Numbers are great for articles, but let's watch the film. And listen, I can say I was wrong about the projections for Le'Veon Bell last year. We had the discussion on the air multiple times, and Matt Waldman was kind of talking us down. I believe you were more in the middle. Matt was pro Le'Veon Bell. I was like, this guy is a space runner. You brought up James Starks. It reminds me of what Starks was when he came out of Buffalo, where he looks great when the hole's huge. But what about when the hole's not huge? And in watching Le'Veon Bell and looking at what he did on plays that were blocked properly, plays that weren't, and most of them weren't. By the way, David DeCastro, don't target your own offensive line. It's what he did. He had to. Marquise Pouncey being back will be huge for Le'Veon Bell. But I liked what I saw from this kid. There was some hesitation. Every rookie has to learn essentially almost how to slow down. Not to speed up. Most rookies are too fast. Even Monte Ball has said that. I had to slow down, had to be patient. You had to learn that patience. I liked what I saw on film from Le'Veon Bell, and not just the highlight runs, but the intent between the tackles, taking what the defense gave him, and being able to get skinny as a 230-pound man can get. So I liked what I saw from Bell, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. Then you bring up the receptions. He can catch 50 passes, but, of course, Trent Richardson, 51 catches as a rookie. It's not as simple as looking at the numbers, and that's why I sell this. Dr. Gene, your thoughts on this whole, yards per carry was low as a rookie, so that means he sucks sore.
Yeah, I think there's 2 quick things I would say. One is I do think there's something to yards per carry, but I put a lot more stock in it if it's a trend. So if this was Bell's 3rd year and he'd gone from 4.5 to 4.1 to 3.5, then yes, I think there's a lot of reason to concern. There'd be more things that we can compare it by. We could have some sense of, why this trend may be meaningful. 1 year, as you guys mentioned with the offensive line the way it was last year with Bell getting accustomed to the league, I don't know that I'm going to be all that concerned about. The other thing, and you guys, I watch the defensive side of the ball a little bit more often than the offensive side of the ball, but my impression is that Munchak is more of a zone scheme guy than a power guy. Not that the Steelers were all power. Certainly we saw them use a lot of zone concepts last year, but given what Bell's skill set is, if Munchak is going to run a lot more zone scheme work in the running game, that plays into Bell's strengths a little bit more with his vision, with his footwork, with his weight and patience, and then get up and go. If the offensive line can pull that off, then I think there's a lot of reason, not only to not be too concerned about the 3.5, but to expect it to increase, even if the offensive line itself isn't that much better personnel-wise. Maybe the scheme will fit them a little bit better.
And buy or sell moves on, and another running back and a second-year back, but the first time we're going to see him, hopefully for a long time, is Marcus Lattimore. Now, you brought up in talking about our man Calvin Watkins Bloom, our beat writer tour, which will get underway in July when everyone gets back from vacation. Of course, reaching out to Matt Mayako, good friend of the show, great guy. He had an interesting article today from the Football Guys Newswire. Marcus Lattimore not an absolute lock to make the roster. This is on the heels of another Mayako report. And if you talk about beat writers, and and Matt Barrows is there as well, and of course Bill Williamson, San Francisco's got a great group of beat writers. Mayako's right there, right at the top. This comes on the heels of another report from Mayako saying Lattimore still has a ways to go to look like his pre-injury form. He's probably tentative out there at minicamp, not showing the explosion or the burst or the cutting ability that he used to. And Marcus Lattimore certainly a darling for a lot of dynasty owners out there who just, I'll hold on to Marcus Lattimore because if he gets back, wow, what a talent. I mean, you're talking top 15 of naturally talented runners. He has a top 5 natural talent if he comes back, but that's a big if. So buy or sell, not an absolute lock to make the roster. Nobody's really a lock, outside of Colin Kaepernick and that team and a handful of others, but it was a bit surprising. Then reading Miyako's stuff, Bloom, I'm not saying I'm worried, and I will sell the fact that he's not going to make the roster or not going to be with the team, but it was interesting to read what our man Matt Miyako had to say, Bloom.
Yeah, I'll admit that, I was a Matt Lattimore guy, and I wanted to believe. And I suppose if I have some Achilles heels as a fantasy analyst, I will sometimes embrace narratives and I want to live in that world. I want to live in a world where Marcus Lattimore, with his character, with his dedication, can get back to enough of what he used to be a fantasy factor. But I agree with you that more of the tenor and tone of what we hear from including Lattimore himself makes me feel like, and I'll go back to something. Gene? Wasn't it when we had Will Carroll on the couch when he said something like James Andrews did surgery to get him back on the field, not to totally rehabilitate him back to where he was before, but did what he could so that he could play football again. Am I remembering that correctly, Gene?
I don't remember specifically, but I think that's something that would make sense in this particular case. Not that they were just doing the surgery to give him a chance, but knowing that it was a devastating enough knee injury that only a player with the elite skill set that Lattimore had before the injury probably had a chance to recover from something like this.
Right. So I think going back to that was the first little sand in the oyster that made me think, I don't like to hear that. And you go back to that initial emotional reaction to the injury, and I do think at this point, especially the Hyde pick. I mean, the Hyde pick does give. I know that he was potentially a value there, and it's smart for them to reload with all the picks that they have. But I think that at this point, I wouldn't be dropping Lattimore in dynasty leagues, but I would certainly trade him for like a second-round pick right now. And I would be, if someone came asking about him, I would be willing to deal him because I really am kind of losing the belief that he can get back to a high enough level to be a fantasy factor.
And he's just such a good guy. I mean, that's another story that you root for, Bloom.
Yeah.
Marcus Lattimore is humble. He's grounded. Loves his mother. Loves his mother. You want that guy to be able to succeed. I remember joking around in a Q&A with Roger Goodell at the draft in New York City a few years ago, and it was after Lattimore's freshman season. And I said, "Can you get him in?" Just joking around. And yeah. Well, I wish. He's one of those players. And we rarely see it. Okay, you saw it with Adrian Peterson. John Madden said DJ Williams, the linebacker for the Broncos, was one of those high school to the pros. Marcus Dupree, the infamous Chris Mortensen picture, Bloom, when we're at Broncos training camp, we were talking about Marcus Dupree then. There's like 3 or 4 players that were that good immediately in college football that could have made the jump. Dr. Gene, your thoughts here, obviously, with Lattimore's condition.
I think there's reason for pessimism for lots of the reasons that Bloom mentioned, and it was a devastating injury, and we haven't seen much from Lattimore yet. but I think there's still a little bit of reason for optimism. We really never expected Lattimore to do much on the field, certainly not to get on the field and do much on the 53-man roster, but maybe not even get a lot of snaps in practice and get his feet wet, so to speak. There are fewer and fewer OTA and minicamp practices. I think we're on the order of 14. So the fact that they did, Mayako and others even noted that there was some improvement from one week to the next. Not so much where they said that he was then a lock to make the roster, but there has been some improvement. And I think you have to give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit. Yes, he's going to be tentative. He hasn't really probably taken that many reps in pads. I don't know how many he got toward the end of last year when they're only doing one padded practice a week. None of these practices were padded in OTAs and mini camps that I'm aware of, full pads where they're doing full hitting. So let's see how he does through the first couple of weeks in training camp. Hopefully we'll get to see him in a couple of preseason games, and we can gauge just how much of the explosiveness he's lost, how much of that he's got back. So I don't know that I would completely write him off yet. I'm not in disagreement with Bloom when he says if you can get a good offer for him in a dynasty league, that you think about taking it, because his value isn't likely to be all that much higher than it was in the past. It's not going to be any higher. It can really only go down. But I think there's room to have a little bit of optimism left over. But I think part of the deal with Lattimore is, Kendall Hunter's there. Carlos Hyde is there now. Frank Gore isn't going anywhere. Every team keeps a different number of running backs, but can they carry a guy like Lattimore if he's not going to play special teams? They've got Brandon Thomas there. Navarro Bowman is going to have to be carried. There's a number of guys, depending on whether or not they're going to be spending time on the PUP list, so they may not count against the 53 right away. But a deep team like the Niners, who have a lot of draft picks that they might want to keep around, Lattimore's probably going to have to show enough that he can hang on special teams at some point, because there's only so many guys that you could keep that you're not going to put on the active roster on game day. So that may be working against him as much as anything else, and I think that's some of the stuff that we've been reading about him in the local media is they're looking at him in special teams and seeing how much he's going to be able to contribute there. I think that's going to have as much to do with whether or not they give him another year to recover as anything else.
Bloom, I promised myself I wouldn't talk about Joe Hampton, but I do have to ask this, because we were talking about the Miami situation and how there was a narrative not that long ago, Daniel Thomas may not even make the team. There was the same narrative with Michael James. Now with this Lattimore narrative that's coming out, you feeling better in a deep dynasty league about James' value with the team?
It's funny. I've had a couple of instances in the last month or so where I saw a rookie or someone I wanted to pick up in a dynasty league, and Michael James was the guy at the cut line on my team, and I cut him. The little bit that I saw of the Michael James, I did see a little more juice in his legs when he got on the field last year, but he looked impatient. He looked jittery. He didn't look like he was disciplined or under control. And I just think that in the NFL, you don't have that much time. You don't have that many shots. He may endear himself to a team on returnability, potentially some change of pace type stuff. But at this point, I think if he was going to get his foot in the door in some way, he would have. And I would be ready to move on from him. I think that he's kind of at best, at the very, very, very best, we could hope for him to be like a poor man's Woodhead or McCluster at some point. In that type of role. I'm saying that's what you would want for him at this point. I don't see him making any sort of fantasy impact except as maybe a 40 or 50 catch guy with a chance to do a little bit more, but I have seen enough to say that it's time to move on. I mean, now granted, if we start getting into specific names and you're saying, well, would you drop him for maybe it might not always be yes, but most of the time would be yes.
Bloom, for longtime listeners to the show, been doing this since 2006, and we'll get to a Michael Turner-like prospect a little bit later when we talk about Toby Gerhart and the opportunity there for him in Jacksonville. But years ago, Darren Sproles was a big topic of conversation on this show, and it's like, what the hell's the matter with the Chargers? Why won't they do it? We saw it on returns, certainly, and once in a while on some screen passes, and you were higher on Sproles than anybody. You don't get that same feeling from the limited time we've seen James then, correct?
No, he hasn't. James has flashed some short area explosiveness and the natural abilities to be that kind of player. That's why I want to put him in. And Sproles is another good name to put out there. Dunbar is another name that now we're going to start putting in that group, I think, after this year. but he doesn't have control of it. That was the thing about Sproles, as you saw the short area phone booth quicks explosiveness, but you saw him be able to dial up moves at the exact right moment and really be able to just read tacklers and make them look silly. And I still have not seen James do that. He's too jittery. So that's something to watch in preseason. It's a game slowing down kind of thing for him. But if it hasn't happened yet, I'm not going to bet on it's happening.
You used to talk about Darren Sproles and the steps per yard.
Yep.
Which we developed frequency. And really, I agree with you. Sproles is toying with people. James is just like, you're supposed to move, right? And that was a juke move there for the people watching on tonight's show. The Audible Live continues. And buying or selling the hot topics in Washington. Jordan Reed just got to stay healthy. News item coming out. And this one is from the Washington team website. And Washington offensive coordinator Sean McVay said tight end Jordan Reed will be a big part of the team's offense in 2014. He's going to be a key player, McVay told the media during minicamp. He's an elite route runner for the position, and he still competes with toughness, got a great feel, great feet, so he can cover guys up in the run game as well. You look at all the changes that they've made, and of course, starting with Jay Gruden come in, Mike Shanahan out. You see McVay in. You see the addition to Deshaun Jackson there in Washington. Jordan Reed, again, just has to stay healthy. But Dr. Gene, buying or selling the fact that he'll be a key part of the offense based on that health. Because, man, the talent's there. But some concerns here with the second-year tight end. Dr. Gene, your thoughts on buy or sell Jordan Reed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. Health is definitely a concern. Any head injury that Reed suffers this year is probably going to be a prolonged absence for him. It's hard to see them clearing him to return in 1 week after how things went last year and the end of his college career. I think the addition of Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon being over his foot problem as strong receiving options for Robert Griffin. Just how many times are they going to throw the ball with Jay Gruden? But on the other hand, Jermaine Gresham averaged close to 60 catches over the past 3 years, including what would have been a 50-plus catch season if he had played all 16 games last year. I know we didn't see that much out of Tyler Eifert, so we don't know exactly what Jay Gruden likes to do with his tight ends necessarily. He really didn't seem to have any identity for the Bengals at one point last year. But this isn't the Shanahan offense where there's going to be a lot of bootlegs and a lot of looking for the tight ends down the field necessarily, I don't believe. So depends on what you mean vital part of the offense. Do I think you can get 60 to 70 catches here? I think that's possible. I think that's a reasonable ceiling. I think his floor is probably a little bit lower than that for a couple of different reasons. So this is one of those guys where projection is hard to do because of the wide range of things that you could get based on durability and based on how Robert Griffin progresses in the offense and which ways they want to go.
What do you think we see from Reed this year, Bloom, and buyers selling him being a big part of the offense?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to plug the article I just wrote, but I think of those dead zones, and I look at the I call it a dead zone at tight end after the top four, after Jordan Cameron, when you're looking at Davis and Witten and Pitta and Olsen and Reed and Rudolph, and I don't see the upside to approach the top four. I do see that outside of that group, guys like Dwayne Allen and Travis Kelce and Heath Miller. I think that we can look at Reed's numbers from last year, and we can think about the kind of player that Reed is, okay? Is he a big red zone target? No. Is he a threat after catch? And this is where I parted ways, and I'll admit that in my rookie rankings I missed on Reed. I looked at him as a poor man's Aaron Hernandez, which, that was the comparison obviously because of Florida, because of his role and things like that. And I think that I maybe underestimated how he could fill a vacuum in Washington of targets beyond Pierre Garçon. Last year he's competing with Santana Moss and Leonard Hankerson. Those are the next huge receivers. Josh Morgan, there's another one. These are the guys he's competing with for targets. This year it's Deshaun Jackson and Andre Roberts. And even with Reed, you can look at last year, and there was that 45-41 shootout against Chicago when he had 9 for 134 and a touchdown. But otherwise, his numbers were good but not great. When you add into that the concussion risk, it just doesn't sound that attractive to me. I think that his upside is mid tight end 1 with a big risk that he blows up in your face. So if you don't get your starting tight end in the first 4, I would kick it down the block a few more rounds and again, take someone later that I think offers just as much upside.
Buy or sell continues here on the Audible, and we'll continue the tight end talk, but we'll go from a young guy to an old guy, and an old guy that is one of the guard that changes a lot of things. Still remember Antonio Gates emerging there at the end of the year, whatever year that was, a decade ago, and the basketball star, and we bring that into the conversation and scouting this new look tight end for the National Football League, because tight ends, really they're not the same of what they used to be. And yes, there were exceptions, Kellen Winslow, etc. John Mackey, you want to go back that far. Exceptions to the rule about what a tight end could be. Shannon Sharp, Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates. These are guys that helped change the way tight end was used. And Chargers tight end Antonio Gates, again, not a young guy anymore, set to become an unrestricted free agent in 2016. You've got Ladarius Green getting thrown into the mix here as well, a young, talented move tight end. That can certainly get down the seam, attack the deep middle seam of a defense. So I ask you this, Sigmund Bloom, to start out with. Is this the last year we see Antonio Gates in a Chargers uniform? And for fantasy owners looking at that Green-Gates situation,
right,
looking at average draft position, and we're talking tight end 2 now, Gates is at tight end 17, and
right.
Green is at tight end 15. So the fantasy world has spoken.
Yeah, this is one of those split the babies situations where they're going to keep each other from having consistent fantasy value. I think with Gates, there's a tendency to look at his numbers last year, his season-long numbers last year, and say, well, he can still be a low-end tight end 1 for us. But if you actually look at his splits and the trajectory his season was on, in the first half of the year he had 48 catches for 550. In the second half of the season he had 29 for 322. It's an arrow clearly pointing down. In the first half of the season, he had 8 for 124, he had 10 for 136, he had 7 for 74. In the second half of the season, he did not have a game over 5 catches. He had 2 other games in the first half of the season with 6 catches. So he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games with six or more catches in the first half of the year, 0 in the second half of the year. Meanwhile, he's going to still get 2, 3, 4, 5 catches a game, which is going to keep Ladarius Green it'll get ramped up. And I think that Zach Ertz is going to be similar, where you have some weeks, and Green did this last year, and he really messed with my projections when he did this, because he went on a run last year of 4 for 81, 3 for 80 and a touch, and 2 for 45 and a touch, and it really seemed like, okay, he's arrived. You're going to use a guy like this. Plus, Eddie Royal was banged up. Vincent Brown wasn't doing anything. Malcolm Floyd was out for the year. It seemed like there was a vacuum there. But I think another factor here that's putting a drag on this is that San Diego wants to control the clock and run the ball, and they were doing that very well. They really came alive as a team when that clicked. So there will be weeks that Ladarius Green has top 5 or top 6 tight end numbers because he breaks a long touchdown. And then there are going to be weeks like you had 3 consecutive zeros during the fantasy playoffs after that run. It makes me sheepish. If he does it for the first 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row, I'll be willing to admit that I'm wrong. But I think that these guys cancel each other out as sharing a tight end role that isn't going to be that big to begin with. Certainly not enough to turn one of them into a tight end 1 if they're splitting targets down the middle.
Sharon is carrying, Dr. Gene. Your thoughts on buy or sell about Gates' final year in San Diego?
I think you have to buy it for all the reasons you guys mentioned. I mean, just to recap them, he's 35 years old. They owe him $6 million last year. Ladarius Green is there, and there were already signs of a tail off last year, and we know he's had some durability issues in recent years. So I think the signs are it's much more likely that he won't be a Charger next year than that he will.
Buy or sell continues here on the program. And I'm just going to go ahead and make it a triple. Not a triple like at the end of the show, but a triple in tight ends. And we'll talk about the Giants and their use of a tight end by committee. And to bring up a player that we've been monitoring, of course, you play in all sorts of different leagues, but if you play in super deep dynasty leagues, then you're going to know when I say Adrian Robinson was a player that you kept tabs on, or you put him on your roster, or put him on your practice squad. And maybe as you prepare for this year's draft and you're getting some trade buzz, These are things that you look at in the super deep dynasty leagues, and you look at the Giants and you look at a latest news item about them potentially using a tight end by committee. And this is not what you want to hear for fantasy owners, okay? And this one coming in from NJ.com, and it's from Jerry Reese. Said he believes the team will likely use several players at tight end this upcoming season since there is no clear candidate for the starting job. Reese indicated that he believes Adrian Robinson and Larry Donnell can be dynamic offensive players in 2014. I bring this up not only because of Adrian Robinson, Bloom, a player that we spent some time talking about and addressing for our deep dynasty brethren, but I also bring this up because of Ben McAdoo. And, Jermichael Finley is floating around out there. You think of him in that Green Bay system. You think of McAdoo bringing his Green Bay, system to the Giants. And then I think of Eli Manning, and I go, well, he hasn't looked worth a shut your mouth until since Martellus Bennett was there and the Black Unicorn. And losing Martellus Bennett, you lost some teeth with that offense. And certainly Gilbride's system, it needed to change. But point is this, McAdoo's system is interesting. Eli's better when he's got a fine move tight end. If it's not there from Robinson, and I know Reese is saying this, but there was a report earlier this year, not that long ago, about Robinson not really looking that good. Then you say committee, and then I say, well, so much for finding any value there, Bloom.
Yeah, and, this is something, Cease, I'm sorry. This is going to be me on the air. Because I was just arguing with many people about your Emmanuel Sanders take. They're saying. See, I'm gonna try to turn this around. I'm gonna cover up my embarrassment for, because I, you guys know you do like just listen for the name and then you can just jump right in.
But you had the sword and shield out.
I was defending your honor, but I really shouldn't do that. Sometimes my multitasking causes me to. You're seeing this all live, everybody out there. My pants are down. Yeah.
We have cut some of this out.
Oh, there's a lot of this on the cutting. There's a lot of this on the cutting room floor. There is a lot. There's a lot of me. Sorry, Cease. What was I supposed to be talking about right there? Or even better is when we're doing the preview and Cease introduces one team and I give the rundown on the other team in the game. And then at the end of the take, I'll say, "Oh, I was supposed to be talking about the Eagles, wasn't I?"
It's the magic of editing. We just split.
Yes.
There we go. So Bloom in the tight end by committee with the Giants, and Adrian Robinson.
Giants, yeah.
Adrian Robinson. Some reports saying he hasn't looked that good. Reese is saying it's tight end by committee. I thought of McAdoo and that tight end friendly system. I thought of Eli, who hasn't looked the same since Martellus Bennett. And then I get disappointed when I hear it could be tight end by committee.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. I saw something this week that the Giants are saying, we'll figure out, we're not quite sure who the left tackle is going to be. We're working on that. We'll figure that out. And that tells me that the tight end, in so much that they are on the field, and the Giants do generally, even though they signed Brandon Myers last year, like for their tight ends to block. And I think that screams to me as your tight end is going to be a 6 offensive lineman as much or more often than they will be an eligible receiver out in routes. And the inexperience, and I mean, you're trying to really oversell this when you're telling me Adrian Robinson and Larry Donnell can be these guys. I mean, it's a 3-wide system. That's going to be your main targets. And I think that if we want to look for deep sleepers, now granted, Adrian Robinson might do some stuff in the preseason when we say, considerable physical talent, maybe he's harnessing it. But if you're looking for deep sleepers, the Giants are going to be at the bottom of the list because of that offensive line and because it's just not an attractive situation as far as experience or talent. And unlike Julius Thomas, and since when I was defending your honor, I was bringing up Julius Thomas. Unlike Julius Thomas, who came into the league, we knew that he was a receiving specialist. I mean, that's what he does. That was his game. Adrian Robinson, while he has the physical attributes to be a very talented target, came into the league as an underused receiver, and even as recent as last offseason, there's talk that they were making him more of a blocker. So again, with the offensive line issues, I just, I'm holding on to him in tight end, premium, deep dynasty leagues, and that's about it.
And Dr. Gene, you're around a team that has a bit of a tight end by committee in Cincinnati, but you hear this about the Giants, and perhaps holding out hope that would be different. It doesn't sound like it this year.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that. I think there's a long difference, a big difference between Gresham and Eifert and Robinson and Donald. Is that who
Mm-hmm.
we're thinking is, not even Kellen Davis is
Yeah.
an option necessarily there. So um, it- what this tells me is that if we're thinking about tight end by committee, I agree with Bloom. It's probably more from a blocking perspective than anything else. But if Adrian Robertson is being talked about in a committee with Larry Donald, then that says pretty much all you need to know about his fantasy value this year.
Well, let's go from one unknown to another unknown. Maybe people out there are like, Larry Donald, why are you talking about this? And there's buzz. Again, it's the off season. There's nothing more infuriating than people bringing up Ronnie Hillman, or people that say, oh, well, it's a mini camp, pads. Come on, no pads, shorts, and mini camp. You can assemble clues, okay? You can assemble clues in practices and camp. Do you take them as gospel? Do you say this is everything? No, but you can assemble clues. And there's been a name that's popping up in Arizona. And Bloom, in covering the news wire at footballguys.com, as we do every day, and you can sign up for our daily newsletter. It's free at footballguys.com. We send all the hot takes right to you every day, the stories that you need to know. One name that keeps popping up, and we've talked a ton. This wide receiver class is amazing. This draft class is outstanding. We've talked a ton about the likes of Cody Latimer and Mike Evans and Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Cooks. I can't stand Kelvin Benjamin. I mean, the list goes on and on about how much we've talked about this receiving group. We haven't talked about John Brown enough. And every week, it seems like there's some clues being assembled. And again, we've got some great guys in place at Arizona, some friends of the show, beat writers that are on top of what's happening with the Arizona Cardinals. And Kent Summers right at the top of that list. John Brown is a name that keeps coming up. And a rookie receiver, somebody we haven't talked about a lot, Pitt State, the Gorillas of Pitt State. We haven't had a draft pick from Pitt State since Ronald Moore. You remember that name years, and I remember the football card going, yeah, this guy's a sleeper. So Ronald Moore was the last Pitt State prospect that we got to talk about as a draft pick. This time, it's John Brown. And then I think Arizona, and I think of Bruce Arians, I think of vertical. We love Larry Fitzgerald. We have a great appreciation for Michael Floyd. Andre Ellington could be the man. Love Bruce Arians and the Raspberry Beret. John Brown. There's T.Y. Hilton comparisons being tossed around. So, Bloom, knowing this speed receiver, and obviously Arians' propensity to go vertical, buying or selling this John, it's every week, Bloom. It's not just a small story or the bottom capsule in a story.
Right.
No, they're every week stories like, holy cow, this John Brown kid is amazing. And listen, we talk about everybody. We haven't talked about this guy enough.
No, we haven't, and we should. I think that you're right to talk about how constant the drumbeat has been. It has been from the official Cardinal site. It has been from beat writers. It has been from teammates. It has been from coaches. And look, you do this long enough, and everybody's an all-star in OTA. Every team is happy that they took their rookie. But sometimes it's meaningful. Okay, you have to be able to discern that and see that this is one of those where there's smoke, there's some fire. And I'm not going and drafting John Brown in redraft leagues this year. I certainly think in your rookie drafts he's a bona fide third-round pick. And I do think the T.Y. Hilton comparison is important because he has a similar skill set, and he was used Hilton with some success by Arians, and you have those receivers on the outside, Floyd and Fitzgerald, that will leave Brown in these one-on-one matchups. What I'm taking out of it for this year is Carson Palmer continues to intrigue me. You have Jared Veldier and Jonathan Cooper shoring up the offensive line. You have for Bruce Arians, as you said, sees vertical. And you have Carson Palmer. And Carson Palmer is the kind of dude that you can leave back there hanging like a side of beef that Rocky beats up. And he takes these shots, and he's going to get up, and he's going to dust himself off, and he's going to keep taking those shots. You know, Bruce Arians really does leave his quarterback back there like that, right? And Carson Palmer's fine with that. Carson Palmer will hang in and take those shots downfield again and again and again. So I'm thinking of Carson Palmer, plus the defense is going to have some problems with injuries, especially early in the year. I think Carson Palmer, remember last year, Carson Palmer was not a fantasy slouch, and that was with a worse offensive line. And what we saw Palmer do last year, and this is a great example, a great moment to step in and say, wow, quarterback stats are getting inflated. Would it shock you to know that last year Carson Palmer threw for 4,274 yards and 24 touchdowns? I mean, that used to be really good back when Carson Palmer was a quarterback one. Those were quarterback one numbers. If he improves just a little bit from that, with Floyd coming into his own, with Fitzgerald hopefully being healthier this year, now with the speed of Brown, with an improved offensive line, with Andre Ellington, no longer are we going to be giving Rashard Mendenhall 20 carries for 40 yards. I think this is all. Arizona is an offense, a pass offense in particular, that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, to quote Ricky Waters, for who, for what? What's that do with Rashard Mendenhall? It did nothing, and now they don't have to worry about that. But John Brown, interesting. Your thoughts, Dr. Gene and Byersell, about this kid, and again, assembling the clues. Bloom called it the drumbeat, Dr. Gene. We keep hearing about this guy, and it's all good.
Yeah, I think Carson Palmer probably would have had 4,500 yards if you counted all the interception return yards that he had last year, too. So that's something.
There's a drumbeat.
Now, what intrigues me about John Brown is we've seen it before with Bruce Arians. You hinted at it a little bit before. Antonio Brown, T.Y. Hilton. We've seen him make use of rookie wide receivers in this position before. And with all what we're hearing about John Brown, yes, Fitzgerald and yes, Floyd are there, but I think that works in Brown's favor a little bit. We're not talking about Brown necessarily getting 100 targets and 60 catches, but next to Fitzgerald and Floyd last year, Floyd had 111 targets, but Andre Roberts had 75. So I don't think that's necessarily out of the range of impossibility there. We may see 40 to 50 catches out of Brown without that much difficulty, and if the offensive line is that much better and he builds a little bit of rapport with Carson Palmer, you certainly see a little bit more than that.
And there we go, and continuing on, and we'll keep track, and certainly in the Beat Writer Tour, when we get Kent Summers on, and we're going to talk about the Cardinals, that's a player we're going to talk about and really find out what's going on there. And might be the first time we talk about Ronald Moore on this show. We've talked plenty about Tavon Austin, and a news item coming in from St. Louis and from STL Today about Brian Schottenheimer hinted that the team will expand Tavon Austin's role this season. Quote, moving him around to a lot of different spots, close quote, Schottenheimer said, continued to say, you'll see us hand him the ball, do some different things. He's playing so much faster because he just knows what we're doing. He has the system down cold. And here's where you get to say cold-blooded, Bloom. So buying or selling an expanded Tavon Austin's role, and your thoughts about the youngster, of course, very exciting skill set, but is Brian Schottenheimer going to use him in an exciting way?
For Brian Schottenheimer. I mean, that's the thing. Is like we can start spinning a good old yarn about this and getting you excited until we get to the Brian Schottenheimer part. It's the same guy that you did not do it last year. Why do we expect him to do it this year? I mean, they're going to try. You go to the furniture showcase and you bring home that I think it was on Mad Men. It was like a feigning couch or something like that. You bring home that really ugly piece of furniture that looks great in the showroom. You're not just gonna put it out on the curb after the first week. You're gonna try. Okay, we tried it in the living room and it's ugly and it doesn't work. Let's try it maybe in the den. Let's see if we can put it on the back porch and maybe make it a nice outside piece of furniture. You're not going to give up on Tavon Austin after what they gave up for him, a first and second round pick, after 1 year. You're not just going to say, oh, he's just Dexter McCluster. Now, is that enough to entice me to take him in redraft leagues at ADP? Nah. Is it enough for me to hold on to him in dynasty leagues, PPR leagues in particular, and not sell him, that this is your last chance to get out? Probably. But it's Brian Schottenheimer. That's the problem. All of these things intersect at Brian Schottenheimer. And Tavon Austin could easily be one of these guys that it's on his second team that we see him look like the player that we thought he might become. Because I just have to say, I'm going to say it over and over again until I just gouge my eyes out. Brian Schottenheimer, Brian Schottenheimer, Brian Schottenheimer.
Yeah, and I can't stand Todd Haley, but I'll look down my nose at Brian Schottenheimer.
Yeah.
Steelers fans, we got something to cling on to. Dr. Gene, your thoughts here on what Austin could possibly be. Again, Brian Schottenheimer.
That sounded a little bit like Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice,
Yeah.
Beetlejuice to me. So hopefully that's not the way it goes. I don't know. I think you have to buy this. I'm looking down his game logs from last year: 9 rushes and 69 targets. You're not going to do more than 78 potential touches for Tavon Austin this year, then I, you know, it's not like their depth chart is stock full of playmakers, much less wide receivers. So I think you have to expand Austin's role, whether it's put him in a Percy Harvin, Cordero Patterson type situation where they're trying to get him 2 or 3 carries a game and looking at him over the middle a little bit more. If you look through his first couple of weeks there, he had 7, 12, 7, 8, and 6 targets in the first 5 weeks and started out with 6 catches each. They didn't go for a lot of yardage earlier in the season, but there have been some signs that they wanted to involve him in the offense a little bit more. Hopefully, Sam Bradford coming back healthy, that offensive line looking a little bit more robust will allow them to do a little bit more. But I think they're just going to have to figure out ways with the playbook to get the ball in his hands.
I feel the same way about Tavon Austin as I do about Sammy Watkins this year. You're the Bills, and you make that move for Sammy. Just use him in any way you possibly can, not as a returner, but target him. Get him open and let the natural playmaker make plays. Speaking of natural playmaker, another segue, Bloom, gold star for me. Can Randall Cobb lead the NFL in catches? We're going to toss this one around in buy or sell. Randall Cobb, of course, talented Green Bay wide receiver, and this one coming from the Green Bay official website about, just toss it out there. He could be used so much that he leads the NFL in catches last year. 113, Bloom, top of my head,
Right.
Garcon. So is that Randall Cobb? And speaking of possible trades, I'm looking over my restricted free agents in my main fantasy league, and I want Frank Schwab to beat me.
Frank Schwab
in the Colorado Pigskin League. So that's like a drop. I wait for it now. In the CPL, and I'm looking over my RFAs, and I'm like, okay, what's my contract look like for Randall Cobb? Because I have Randall Cobb, and I have him signed for a pretty good price, and I believe that price will stay in that range where I'd like to pay it. So I would love this. I would buy it all day if the fact that he comes back after that injury-plagued season and comes in and leads the NFL in catches. So buying or selling Randall Cobb this year, Bloom, and how quickly fantasy owners change. I mean, they'll fall in love, they'll fall out of love. People are so fickle. Randall Cobb's a stud if he's healthy.
Yes. And by the way, Cease, you do some Nuggets stuff, right, on ESPN radio?
Yeah.
Because your team drafted Yusuf Nurkic tonight, and they also drafted Nikola Jokic. I don't know, Bosnian and Serbian names. I'm sorry for butchering them, but you're going to have to brush up on your Eastern European pronunciations, I think, for your Nuggets segments coming up on the NBA draft. Randall Cobb, I love the talent. Obviously, you love the offense. I do think that we are looking at the pie in Green Bay getting a little bit smaller in the passing game because of Eddie Lacy, because of the balance, because this team seemed very content to win, 26-17 kind of games or 19-13 kind of games last year. They aren't going to do with Aaron Rodgers what New Orleans and Denver have done with Peyton Manning and Drew Brees and said, you're the offense, really. I mean, we have a lot of complementary pieces for you, but it all is you. And I think because of that, Aaron Rodgers getting to 100, 110 catches, it'll be tight. I mean, I think that 90 is very reasonable. I think he's a very solid wide receiver too, but I do think in that same range of the draft, if you want someone who really has a shot at getting to 110 or 120 catches, it's Victor Cruz because of the offense, because of the role, and then there's the Green Bay connection there, and because he's somebody who has shown more durability and more ability to hit his peak as a scorer than Cobb. So I do think that Cobb is a solid third-round pick. I would probably sell this just a bit if you were saying out of the receivers going in his area of the draft. Andre Johnson, another one. Is he the most likely to hit that 105, 110 catch plateau?
Oh, and you brought up Andre Johnson. Just got me thinking, Case Keenum, really? Like, I would like to work out with Andre during the break. That's fine. He's not going to answer your call, bro.
Yeah.
Back on track, Dr. Gene. Is Randall Cobb buying or selling? Are you buying or selling the fact that he could lead the league in receptions?
That he can? Yeah, I'll buy that. I think that's possible. I would like to see his target count go up a little bit. In order to get that 100, 110 catches, I think we probably have to see 150 to 170 targets. I don't know that he's capable of that necessarily with some of the more downfield routes he's been running later in his career. I'm not too worried about the durability factor with him in that Green Bay offense, as potent as it is, even with Eddie Lacy and others probably getting a little bit more running attempts than what we've seen in the past. I think Cobb is capable of 115. I think it's a ceiling. I think it's a low percentage chance for the reasons that Bloom talked about, but I think it's possible.
Couple of more items in buy or sell, and then we'll do a quick round of Twitter questions. Hashtag Audible Live. We appreciate everyone for watching the show, subscribing on iTunes, checking us out at footballguys.com. Matt Mayako, back to Matt, 49ers beat writer extraordinaire, CSNBayArea.com, put the over-under, and he took the under, on 60 catches for Stevie Johnson in San Francisco this year. 60... Bloom, I'd take the under on 50.
Right.
So buying or selling Stevie Johnson, and this also goes hand in hand with a news item that he needs a good training camp from Matt Mayako. Needs a good training camp for Stevie Styles to justify the team awarding him the number 3 wide receiver position, and then you throw in Vernon Davis, so he'd really be the 4th target if he wins that 3rd position.
Right.
Over Quentin Patton, Bruce Ellington, what have you. Miyako put the over-under at 60. That's way too high, man. I'd put it at 50. Yeah. 50, and I'd take the under. Bloom, your thoughts?
Yeah, and even if it's 50, that's something that is newsworthy. I mean, what we have to look at here with the 49ers is where the target's going to come from. We have like a push and pull here thing going on. Because on one hand, Colin Kaepernick's in his 3rd season as the starter. They just gave him a big contract. I mean, you want to put more on his plate, no doubt about it. But as you said, you got Vernon Davis there. You've got Crabtree, who's going to be healthy. You've got Bolden. And then you have Stevie Johnson. Now, last year, remember, Crabtree didn't come on until the 5th game from the end of the season. And so there were all these extra targets floating around the offense. This goes into Vernon Davis's fantasy outlook. Even with the extra targets floating around the offense, although a smaller pie, because that's part of the optimism you want. Yeah, the pie will get larger because of Kaepernick being able to handle more. Okay, that's fine, but that smaller pie last year with no real number 2 receiver to speak of, now we're talking about having a number 2 and a number 3. Vernon Davis had only 52 catches, only 84 targets. That number's not going to go up this year. Vernon Davis is someone that is hard to like. Honestly, Michael Crabtree is hard to like. And Michael Crabtree is going 4th round where you're expecting him to get number 1 wide receiver kind of targets, or at the very least, enough to be somebody who flirts with wide receiver 1 numbers any given week. That's going to be tough. And then you have Stevie Johnson. Even if you say, well, Stevie's only going to catch 35 or 40 balls, if you look last year, the receivers after Bolden and Crabtree combined, all of them, add them all up, and they combine for 29 catches. That's your number 3, number 4, number 5 receiver. Kyle Williams, Manningham, Quentin Patton, Baldwin, Kasim Osgood even caught a ball last year. Those targets have to come from somewhere. Now you can say, oh well, the offense is going to be a little more balanced, but I mean, Bolden I can handle, because Bolden, because he's an old man, is going in the 9th, 10th round. So even if he regresses back to say 65 or 70 catches, we can handle that. Crabtree, I think it takes the luster off of. Vernon Davis takes the luster off of. Not that there was that much after how things went last year. And then Stevie Johnson, he's a dead man walking for fantasy football, but he can take some receiver tight ends with him.
Dr. Gene, over-under at 29 for Stevie Styles in Frisco.
I think you can go over on the 29, but the other thing, the other reason to be a little bit concerned about the 50-60 number is there's been groin issues, back issues, hamstring issues with Stevie Johnson, and no, he's not really as an old a player as you'd expect him to be, but again, I'm not going to label him injury prone necessarily, but multiple soft tissue injuries, especially lower leg soft tissue injuries, call into question whether or not he can make it through a full season. And in the past, he's not practiced but been able to play, and he had 3 16-game seasons in a row. But last year, 12-game season, things are starting to break down with him. I think there's just as much reason to be concerned about him from a durability perspective as it is from an offensive target perspective.
Well, and Dr. Gene, you bring up a great point that kind of leads me into my last buy or sell here tonight on the show. Bloom, I'm going to go old man for a while. Let's reminisce. But when you look back and you think about this show from 2006, and we've got plenty of new listeners, and we appreciate everyone. The old school listeners will remember. We've gone through a couple of cycles now, because we're talking about Stevie Styles, Dr. Gene bringing up how his body is much older than he actually is, and then you go back and you think about Andre Woodson and Keenan Burton, and you think about the cycles. We've seen multiple cycles of players now. This isn't just like we started doing this and we're in 2010 or whatever. It's 2006. We've seen a couple of cycles of players getting pushed through here, and it reminds me, again, going back to what we said earlier in the show, of Michael Turner. Michael Turner sat around, and you saw him briefly, ever so briefly, with San Diego, and you knew that if he got a shot, man alive, was this guy going to be good? And he was good for a few seasons. Certainly, Michael Turner, I've got a jersey, winning a championship with Michael Turner as my lead running back, and we get that with a few players, and there's sometimes, even in today's NFL, where running back is de-emphasized, there's some of those guys that are just like, well, I can't wait until he gets a starting job. And, of course, Turner behind LaDainian, Tubby Gerhart in our final item of buy or sell, and we did have a Twitter question about this from @FFEarlyBird. He's got Gerhart as the top 7 fantasy running back. Do you agree? #Audible Live. Well, we're going to talk a lot about Gerhart, but it reminds me specifically, during the Heisman Trophy presentation, I actually got to talk to Toby Gerhart, and I had a Michael Turner comparison of him. I didn't say that to him. I just said, who do you compare your game to? The standard softball question. And he said, oh, I'm Michael Turner. And he also grew up, his dad would say, you're a lot like Earl Campbell. Nobody's Earl Campbell, so sorry, Toby, you're not Earl Campbell. But could you be Michael Turner? Certainly, and you look at Jacksonville and restructuring things, and maybe Bortles is out for held him back for a year, and Henny's the guy or what have you. But now Toby Gerhart has a real opportunity to say top 7. I'm not going to say that, but if we said solid running back 2, let's put him in the 15 range. Certainly, as a starter with starter capability, more power and speed. And here's why I compared him to Turner. Because he's got deceptive speed. People never thought, they thought of Turner as just, this little roly-poly. No. He was Turner Burner for a reason.
Turner.
Speed. Exactly.
Yeah.
And Gerhardt's got a little bit of that. Not exactly, but a little bit of that. And he was never damn Mike Allstott, okay? Stop looking at the pigment.
Touchdown Tommy.
Yeah, he's touchdown Tommy Vardell because he's the white guy. No, Toby Gerhart has real talent, and excited about him. So when Daniel Jeremiah said... All we're going to do is reminisce in this segment, but Daniel Jeremiah, our guy, and I can't wait until DJ
we're going to get him on soon.
The show.
We
are going to get him back on the show very, very soon. The show that he started on here in the Audible. Love Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network, NFL.com. In talking to executives, the name keeps coming up of Toby Gerhart. So buying or selling, let's maybe not say top 7 like our guy at FF Early Bird, but solid RB2. 15-ish around there, something, buying or selling this buzz that DJ is hearing about Toby Gerhart.
I can buy it. I can definitely buy it. And this has been one of those ones where, congratulations if you did drafts in May, June, early June, and you were getting Gerhart before his ADP went up in a 16-team Survivor League at Football Guys that we draft on the message boards. I got Gerhart at like 5'11", which in a 16-team league really means I was getting him more like in the 7th or 8th round. And that was, I don't know if that was the April or January. The point is his ADP continues to creep up. Now you're probably going to take him in the 4th round. He may even in the MFL 10 of death that I'm doing right now, which is really fun because we've got Evan Silva, we've got our man Rumford Johnny, we've got Rich, it's like on the couch all-stars. Mike Clay, Denny Carter, Ryan Forbes also from Two Mugs, lots of great people. I should probably name everybody after naming. The point is, this is a very competitive league. He went at 3-7. So Gerhart, he has the opportunity, he has the talent. I think Andrew Parsons, friend of the show, said, and he's a Falcons guy as far as NFL affiliations, and you see the Caldwell-Dimitroff connection. There's another Turner Gerhart for you. I think Parsons said months ago that Turner, Gerhardt would be their Turner. Now, they don't have the offensive line necessarily. They don't have Matt Ryan. Even though it was rookie Matt Ryan, they don't have Matt Ryan. So this is the whole thing. We're saying, 80% of Turner maybe. Sure. And that's enough. He's getting all the touches. He has the talent. He's always looked good when Minnesota gave him a lot of work. So I do think that he merits that fourth-round pick. You're still weighing him against guys like Bishop Sankey. You're weighing him against Ryan Matthews, Chris Johnson. I think he's clearly pulled away from the tier with Ben Tate and Rashad Jennings. Those guys were kind of clumped together as the big winners from free agency as far as situations go, whereas those two guys got hit a little bit by the draft. Andre Williams, of course, and Cleveland, take your pick, Crowell or West, where Jacksonville was like, we're fine. Storm Johnson in the 7th round, sure, but we're fine with Gerhardt. I do think that he will deliver on that 4th round pick. 3rd round pick starts to get a little rich, but 4th round pick, I think that Gerhardt is just fine. I will buy him there and buy him as a strong running back too this year.
Dr. Gene, buy or sell Gerhardt? Bloom gave you the data points, and the talking points about Toby Gerhardt. How strong do you feel about this young runner?
I think he could be a low-end running back 1. I think he's in that tier potentially, if for no other reason that, if you want to talk about yards per carry, Gerhardt has always been a strong yards per carry guy. It's not as easy to project that over a 250 carry season necessarily, but I don't see anybody eating into his carries, and I think he's going to play on passing downs as well. One of the little-known things about Gerhardt is he's a guy that's averaged a number of catches. Look over, in his little time, he's been getting 20 catches a game over the last, or 20 catches a year over the last 3 to 4 years in Minnesota. So I think he can contribute in PPR leagues in that standpoint as well. So if you're thinking about looking at him as your running back 2, I don't have any problem with that at all. I don't know that I'd put him right there alongside of DeMarco Murray and the others we've talked about just behind the big 4, but definitely running back 2 for sure I'll buy.
All right, everyone, that wraps up buy or sell. We've got time for a small handful of Twitter questions, and here's how this works. You tweet to us at hashtag Audible Live, and you got to watch with Twitter because I was paid to get drunk on the air again, Bloom, during a World Cup viewing party that I was hosting. Anyway, and I said something about Twitter, and I was like, you can twat me. And sorry, Joe, for saying that, but I was like,
that's the past tense.
Exactly.
You're conjugating the verb.
You twatted me. But anyway, you can tweet us. I'll get it right, and Joe will email me feverishly. Hashtag Audible Live. And again, at Gene Bramall, at Sigmund Bloom, at Cecil Lamy. The show is at The Audible. And here's how this works. We each pick out a question for one of t'other, and we ask it. So, first up, I'm going to ask you, Sigmund Bloom, as we get this question in. And this one comes in, hashtag Audible Live from at Carp57. Can we please hear some positive feedback on Martavis Bryant? What will he be on year 1? Hashtag Audible Live for our guy Carp57, Bloom. And listen, the Steelers, it's no longer the day of Lima Swede and Troy Edwards, picking wide receivers with premium picks that were just no good. We've seen a real influx of talent, and we love Marcus Wheaton and Antonio Brown and even Emmanuel Sanders when he was selected. The Steelers seem to have a better eye for wide receivers than they used to. So, 4th round, Clemson, the other Clemson guy, Martavis Bryant. What are your thoughts, Bloom?
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is the positive feedback isn't necessarily straight positive right now. It's that Bryant is getting coached hard. That's the word out of Steelers OTAs, and they're pushing him, and that's what he needs. And he said he's not where he needed to be going into training camp yet. He needed to be in better shape. He had a lot of work to do and a lot of learning to do. So that does not sound like somebody that's going to be poised to make an immediate impact. And Lance Moore has been getting some decent buzz. Justin Brown, 6th-round pick from last year, big receiver at 6'3", 210, has been getting some buzz. So Bryant may be at the back of the line, but that's not why you're taking him in dynasty leagues, his immediate impact. You're taking him because he's a 6'4", long-limbed guy who can run a 4.4, and to show the ability to use that height to be dominant. Think Justin Hunter. Now, he's got a lot less foundation as someone who only came on at the very end of his senior year. And again, he needs that hard coaching. He might be that guy who gets one shot. He was a late first, early second round physical talent who fell to the fourth round because of all the questions about what you're really going to get out of him. And again, the Steelers are in. And hey, what we want to see when we do pre-draft breakdowns for someone like that, like you want him to land in a good culture. Well, that's good. I mean, the Steelers are a good culture for a player like that. So I still think that he is a great speculative hold with a very high ceiling. And certainly, I mean, I love Marcus Wheaton, but he offers an entirely different set of skills than Marcus Wheaton. And it really all, again, intersects at Ben Roethlisberger, where you have the no huddle, you have Roethlisberger given more control, you have Antonio Brown, you have Heath Miller being healthy. Ben Roethlisberger as a quarterback one is something that, going back to buy or sell, that I could buy. But I do think that Martavis Bryant, it's the talent, it's the ceiling, and so you hope that the Steelers can wring that best football out of him. Really put him through the meat grinder. Yeah, you got it. Twist it up. Rode hard, put away wet. And now I get
twist is what I call the Russian sometimes, but I've revealed too much.
Yes. See, one of these times you're going to say sorry, Joe, to something, and he's not going to know what you said. And he's got to go and Google it, and then you're really going to be in trouble.
Then I'll really be sorry. Cecil, would you come to the office and bring everything to your desk, please?
Right. It's one thing to say sorry.
Surfaced at work.
Yes. Oh man, when is the Cecil Lammy TMZ story going to break?
Soon.
And we can get, and maybe not TMZ, but this is the point where I can get Gene Bramall to go maybe like a little WWE, because this is one that Gene, I feel like I get a chance to ask you this question every year, and Jay Eads32 just set it up. I mean, this is like set him up, knock him down. Gene, and Gene, this is Gene Bramall brought to you by Xanax, but not tonight. This is Gene Bramall brought to you by, I was going to say something like medical grade cocaine, but I'm not really going to do that.
Ooh,
how do you get people excited about IDP?
Try it. Just try it. You have to try
cocaine?
it. Cocaine? Yeah. Sorry, Joe. We'll leave that drop for another time.
You do this so well. You're an excellent ambassador and spokesman for IDP Fantasy Football. Take it away.
No, I think it was a lot harder to try IDP leagues when we were doing this with pencil and paper. It was a lot harder to do this when you weren't exactly sure what stats were, what stats to follow in non-HD, and you couldn't follow numbers on the defensive side of the ball. But you're forgetting half of the ball. There's just as much fun in cheering for Aldon Smith or Von Miller or Greg Hardy. You've got the Kraken on your team. Ray Lewis, Patrick Willis, all of these guys, even in the defensive back, those guys are every bit as much athletes and playmakers as what you're getting on the offensive side of the ball. And with the advent of league management systems, you're not worried about, we used to just do touchdown scoring leagues because it was hard. Nobody wanted to calculate how many yards a guy got during a game. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Everybody's got a tablet open. Everybody's got their laptop while they're watching games. Things are scrolling across the bottom in terms of what stats are there or not. So it's much easier to follow. You're expanding the number of players that you can watch. You're expanding the possible amount of fun you can have. And if your offensive players lay an egg for you one night, you've got a whole other side of the ball that can lead you to a win. There is a little bit of a learning curve there, but that's what we're here to help you along with, is to kind of get you a sense of, when we talk about non-PPR versus PPR, everybody had a little bit of a learning curve with that, or 2 quarterback leagues or flexes, the daily games. There's a learning curve with everything, and the IDP learning curve is not that steep.
And Gene, I'm just gonna put a little addendum here. I know if you're listening to this show or you're watching this show, you, like us, make it your business to obsess about the NFL and make it your business to know everything about everything that you can know. And that's why you start deep dynasty leagues, so you start looking under rocks for the guys that are on practice squads and things like that. That's why you like leagues that are bigger. That's why you like all these different permutations and games, because it gives you all these different lenses that you have to master. And IDP is another one. It will be addictive because it gives you that excuse, it gives you that little nudge to start to learn this side of the ball, and it adds more meat. And that's one of the things I love about fantasy football. It adds all these different layers of meaning when you watch football now. When you have a fantasy team, adding IDP just adds another layer, as Gene was saying. And defensive football is fun to watch. It's invigorating. Gives you a jolt. So if you haven't tried an IDP league, and don't do one linebacker, one defensive back, one defense. Don't do that. Then you're going to get soured on IDP fantasy football. That's not IDP fantasy football. So I can't echo this enough that if you're looking around for the next thing, IDP is the way to go.
Do it. All right, so I guess I owe Cecil a question here. So I like I like the Twitter handle Moose on a Hill, but I like this question as well. Cecil, he wants to know who is more reliable, the sophomore wide receiver or the sophomore running back. And I think I want to take this. I'm not exactly sure where he's coming from with this, but I want to take this in a direction of which one of those players is this offseason more important for? Which player is it a little bit easier to come in and get going right away in that first offseason? But the second offseason, I think, defensive side of the ball, offensive side of the ball, unless you're an offensive lineman, and maybe even in that particular situation, I think it's the second offseason that's key for these guys that don't come in and play right away. So maybe let's take the wide receiver versus running back second-year question a little bit differently. And since we're in that OTA minicamp time of the year right now, who are you watching a little bit more closely? Is there any differentiation between those positions at all? And if there is, which one would you choose?
Yeah, certainly it's wide receiver for a couple of reasons. One, running back is the most natural position on the football field. It's the one that has the easiest transition. It's not easy, but there's an easier transition. You have to learn to be patient. You have to slow your mind down. You have to allow your blocks to fully develop, but you also have to have the burst and the intent, the decisiveness, not to wait too long or dance too much. And yes, there's been players, Thomas Jones is the one I always bring up, that waited and waited and waited and then finally got it. Well, running back in today's NFL, it's a very small window. So you get it or you don't, they move on. And you're basically dime a dozen. Unless you're a special back, you're dime a dozen. And I hate to say that because I love the running back position. But it's wide receiver because of the intricacies of the position. Not many of these players, and even Sammy Watkins. Doug Farrar did a great piece. Doug Farrar from SI.com, great friend of the show. I love Doug Farrar. Great guy, great mind for the game, football junkie, and the second member of Queensryche's fan club. Asked him about his 16th birthday when Queensryche came to his house. This was years ago, years and years, when Queensryche wasn't nothing but a bar band. Anyway, point is this. Doug Farrar did a great piece on Sammy Watkins and how the limited route tree in college is something that they're really going to have to ramp up for him. And, I'm talking about a first-year wide receiver, of course, but if I look at second-year wide receivers and I look at a Cordero Patterson, it's just raw. You see what he can do. You can see the run after the catch ability. You see the ability to make people miss and outrun angles. Big man outrunning angles. That's fun to watch. But it's raw. It's not precise. It's not setting up. It's not counting steps. That's what they learn as they go on. So sophomore wide receivers in today's pass-happy game, they're more reliable, and it's that second year where you really get to flourish because your head is swimming first year. It's swimming as a running back, but you just know, okay, run to daylight, okay? As a wide receiver, it's swimming, but you're trying to work on timing. You're trying to, I gave the example. If I did it on the show before, I apologize. When Peyton Manning shows up in Denver, he tells Demarius, you're running a 22-yard out. Runs the route, throws it, it falls short. Demarius comes back. Runs the route again. It falls short. Demarius comes, and Peyton didn't say anything the first time. Second time, he says, 22 or 25? What is it? And Demarius is like, it's 22. Next time he goes out and he runs 22 exactly, right in the numbers. And, of course, Demarius, a younger receiver, but didn't have a quarterback to work with Timmy. And this is how your head is swimming, like especially with a precise quarterback. You've got to be able to know that it is a 7-yard route, exactly 7. You're not fudging the numbers. In college, you can get away with that. In college, you get away with soft coverage, or you get guys that can just get out-physicaled because maybe they're a corner with small men's mentality. You just throw them out of the way and get to wide open spaces. There's no such thing in the NFL. So it is sophomore wide receivers, and that's why I'm excited about. I brought up Cordero Patterson. I'm excited about a player like him and the upside there because we just saw tip of the iceberg, and we're going to see more this season. So that is a wrap for tonight's program. We appreciate everyone out there for subscribing, for watching, and I'm just saying stay tuned to your iTunes, people, as we've got big announcements coming up for footballguys.com. So let me just tease that out there. Don't want to give too much away, but yeah, just keep that locked and loaded as your iTunes ready for what we've got for you coming up at footballguys.com. Of course, Sigmund Bloom, can follow him on Twitter and argue with him during the show at Sigmund Bloom.
And make me miss my cue.
Swing and a miss. The Bloom, thanks for defending me.
Yeah, always. Are you kidding? I mean, that's what we're here for, really. I want more Mary J. Blige. Now we're gonna have to do a Mary J. with the reminisce. We got to get Mary J. Blige a bump or something, man, because you got me thinking Mary J. tip.
Oh, it's family affair. Let's get it pumping. Dr. Gene Bramall, final thoughts, brother.
We're a month away from training camp. Finally, let's get there.
Just get there. All right. And we will be there very, very soon. We thank everyone for checking out footballguys.com, signing up for our free daily newsletter, checking out the Football Guys Players Championship, and as always, tuning in and watching the show, listening to the show, and subscribing on iTunes for the great Sigmund Bloom and the fantastic Dr. Gene Bramall. I'm Cecil Lammy saying thank you very much for watching and listening. Stay tuned and stay frosty.